let's open up with the Christopher Dring drama, shenanigans, whatever you want to call it. Yesterday, he put out a post that a lot of the IGN-owned websites ran with. And that was, he was told specifically that Xbox Game Pass is not profitable, right? And all you have to look at is the last quarterly report from Microsoft themselves, right? This is an official report that had services up 8% year over year, which means that's in the positive. It's not in the negative, it's in the positive. And the way that Christopher Dring tried to break it down was doing math magic, Jamie. If you discount what they've spent on first party and you subtract that by what they spent, listen, this is why no one pays attention to him, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm not going to be rude. I'm not going to be over the top. When I say he's a journalist, I use that particular term very loosely with him. Anybody can do what he does. What he does is, like we've seen so many people do, blur out something, and his name is well known. Unfortunately, it's well known for rubbish, not so much anything else. But his name is well known. And Jamie, he blurs out something, fans the flame, and then runs away. And then as it's blazing, you have places, and look, I don't really want to go to war with any of the websites. So I'm going to hold myself back of naming the names because that's not what this show is for. We're here on a daily basis, 5 days a week, to celebrate gaming with this amazing community. Now, this is one of those topics that's going to have some smoke because, unfortunately, he started this fire. Well, we're here. We're here to talk about it. And he made a rebuttal, which someone actually said I think he said he pulled it down. I mean, I just found this, so I don't think so. But he set the internet on fire yesterday by claiming he had information that was given to him directly from Microsoft, where it was explained that they don't count first-party investment costs into what they make from Xbox Game Pass. And I got to tell you, folks, when you start to hear that kind of dissecting, that is someone trying to change the narrative so it suits theirs. That's all this is. So I wake up this morning after several websites, and some of which I'm very disappointed with, one of which I know actual people that own it, and I get the business. I understand that everyone on the internet is jockeying for position to get your click. I understand that. I'm not a boob, ladies and gentlemen. I understand the business. But there have been so many disingenuous takes just on this topic in the last 24 to 48 hours. It's unbelievable. I'd even dare say it's egregious. So this morning, I wake up to, do my thing, and I see I have 9 DMs. I'm like, oh, man, what happened? And it's everyone sending me Christopher Dring's rebuttal to his horse shit from yesterday. And it starts out with, okay, I need to correct/clarify something. First, Xbox Game Pass is profitable, even when you factor in the lost sales for first-party teams. Sources who would have known have told me. Jamie, look, I don't want to spend 45 minutes on this topic because I want to get into how I think Sony's third-party future has been revealed, and a lot of the PlayStation loyalists who said that this wasn't going to happen, a lot of the websites who said this would never happen, are about to be wrong again. But I want to get your take on this because, again, we were talking in the green room, and, well, Christopher Dring is who we thought he was, and he does what he does, which is rubbish. Let's get your thoughts on his report on, once again, Game Pass not profitable, and Microsoft, who just did cuts. You would think that if it wasn't profitable, this would be gone like the dinosaurs. Let's get your thoughts, man.
Oh, I've got a lot to unpack here.
Please.
Chris Dring and horseshit are basically a match made in heaven, because this thing happens time and time again, right? And I've had this problem with game journalism for years where, they won't do any investigation work. They'll just, maybe hear something, maybe they'll get a tweet off something, maybe they just like the topic at the moment and they'll want to fan the flames because they'll get people flocking to their website. And they won't actually find out, hey, is this thing true? Because how can you have a source from Microsoft telling you, by the way, none of this, Game Pass isn't profitable, first-party games aren't included, all the costs aren't included, and all that stuff. And then 5 seconds later, oh, by the way, I was proven wrong. So what? So he didn't actually talk to anyone from Microsoft. That's my biggest problem with these people. They make stuff up, right? And yeah, we'll get the obvious out the way first. Again, Microsoft has a tendency to step on rakes, right? They'll have an amazing piece of news, such as a game showcase or a shadow drop at a direct or something like that. They've had a really good year for game releases. If anything, the best year they've ever had for releases. Consistent, high quality, great games. And then 5 seconds later, they'll step on a rake and maybe there's there's layoffs, there's a game cancellation, studios closed or whatever. And people will use that as ammunition against Game Pass. People have had this enthusiasm, over enthusiasm to try and pull down Game Pass since it's been around. And it's always started with, hey, is this good for developers? And then when developers start coming out and saying, hey, it actually is good for us. Then when it came out that people were saying, oh, maybe it overshadows other releases. And it turns out it was pushing people to buy more games, right? Because they were saving more money. And now it's, oh, is Game Pass sustainable? And our first-party games included in the cost, right? There's always this reach for Game Pass. Always. And I made this post yesterday, and I think some people kind of missed out on what I meant. But my point is that how can Sony have a bunch of layoffs? How can Embracer have thousands of layoffs, right? And nobody blames Game Pass. But the second Microsoft has layoffs, it's Game Pass all of a sudden. That doesn't make any sense. This happens time and time again. And if Game Pass wasn't sustainable in any way, Microsoft would be the first company to pull the ripcord, right? Windows RT cost Microsoft $1 billion, right? They had warehouses filled with tablets, never got put out, right? There was going to be an Xbox Watch at some point. They thought it wasn't going to be profitable, never came out. The Surface Mini never came out, billions lost, right? Microsoft has it, and even with devices that's already out. Look at the Zune, right? The iPod competitor, right? They pulled the ripcord on that. Xbox has been around for 25 years, and time again, people are trying to make it seem like it's the end. They come out with services, which is actually changing the industry, and people want it to be the end because for some reason, gaming is in this weird bubble that people don't want to change, right? We've had multiple different kinds of media change over the years, and nobody bats an eye. iTunes changed the music industry back in the early 2000s, right? And then in the early 2010s, we had things like Spotify and other music streaming services where you can listen to an unlimited amount of music for absolutely free. Nobody bats an eye. You have Netflix change the TV and movie industry. You have Apple TV Plus or whatever you call it. You have Paramount Plus, Disney Plus, right? All these services basically doing the same thing. And you have Microsoft doing something similar with gaming, and it's the end of the world as we know it. Cats and dogs are living together in harmony. It's crazy, right? But for gaming, we're not allowed to have change. We have to have the same business model we've had since the 80s, where you go buy a game, you keep it, or you trade it in, right? Now, you can still buy your games. And by the way, boom, this is what I'm about to say is the most crazy thing about this. You have these journalists that constantly going after the Game Pass all the time, saying, but what if you look games behind Game Pass, which they haven't done for 8 years, by the way. Nobody wants to mention the elephant in the room. Apple Arcade. Apple Arcade locks games behind the subscription service. You can't buy them. You have to subscribe to play the games. But these journalists don't go after Apple Arcade, do they? Why? Because nobody talks about Apple Arcade. Nobody has Apple Arcade. Over 30 plus million people have Xbox Game Pass, and they are constantly tuning into this news because you have these people saying, oh, you know, you've seen in the past few days, cancel Xbox Game Pass. They should end Game Pass. Can you imagine the reaction online if Microsoft came out today and said, hey, guys, we love you, but Xbox Game Pass, it's no longer going to be a thing. And we're going to go back to how we were 8 years ago. Hope you have a good day. That would be the biggest reaction Microsoft has ever had in any way. It would be worse than the 2005, Xbox 360 Red Ring of Death situation. It'd be worse than the Xbox One situation with the announcement. It'd be worse than this past week with the layoffs, right? People don't know what they're talking about, right? But, no, we have to be stuck in the past. We have to have people like Chris Dring not doing their actual job, Mr. Lord Farquaad of the internet and game journalism, right? It's annoying. It's happening it's happening all the time, right? And by the way, Sony's getting away with murder at the minute, right? They don't have any roadmap whatsoever.
Nope.
People have been asking for a proper showcase. It's not happening. They didn't have an E3 showcase or summer showcase. Nobody bats an eye, right? They have Sony cancelled Concord two weeks after it came out. The biggest flop of all time, more so than ET, biggest flop of all time. Nobody bats an eye. Everyone forgets it a week later, right? Marathon was meant to be, and Boom. I was looking forward to Marathon. It gets delayed. We don't know when it's going to come out. We don't know if it'll ever come out because the whole Bungie having issues and stuff. But like, all eyes have to be on Microsoft. And yeah, the layoffs that happened last week were awful. It's always awful when this crap happens. But people act over the top whenever Microsoft does it, right? The truth is, all these layoffs are bad, right? But we can't just look at Game Pass. And you think people like Chris Dring, journalist, would know this, right? So why do people get laid off from Sony or Embracer? Was it Game Pass? Should we blame the Xbox Series S as well while we're at it? It's tiring. It feels like the gaming newscape, mainly because of these bloggers and journalists, like we're in this endless cycle of the same thing over and over and over again because, we have some good news, then something bad happens. We have to blame Game Pass or the Xbox Series S. Then a port comes out that, it's stupid, man. The game industry is messed up. And I've said time and time again, the reason we have problems in the game industry at the minute is two reasons. The cost of games is way too high and game dev time is way too long. You can't have games costing $1, $2, $3, $400 million, taking 5, 6, 7, 8 years to make. And I said this last night on Twitter. You can't have games come out like this anymore. It doesn't make any sense. If you're a Rockstar or maybe CD Projekt Red, then it makes sense. Look at The Witcher 4, right? The Witcher 4 is estimated to cost around $400 million. So that game has to be an instant success out of the gate. No drama, no controversy, nothing behind the scenes, nothing. They have to have a pristine, perfect launch. And if they don't, it'll fail. Then you have something like GTA 6. That's obviously going to be a success, right?
Yeah.
It could be the buggiest game at launch, but it's going to be the biggest game of all time because people are sick of waiting 12 bloody years for a new GTA game, right? They're going to have huge success with that game. And it's going to print money with their microtransactions. But like these other games, it doesn't make any sense. I've talked about Perfect Dark on a weekly basis since it was announced. And if you look at that and thinking, wow, that's all they had to show for 7 years of development, was that game ever really going to recoup its money? Was that game? And I feel awful for saying this, but I'm making sense, right? 7 years to make a reboot of an old IP, I think those days are gone across the entire industry, right? I think that the days of, hey, wouldn't it be cool if Microsoft bring back Jet Force Gemini? Those days are up, right? The AAA industry is it's extremely risk averse because it's extremely expensive. So you have one group of gamers that are only playing free to play games. They'll play Fortnite, Apex, your Warzone, all that type of stuff. And the thought of them purchasing a video game is a weird concept. Hell, even buying a console to them is a weird concept. You play Fortnite on your mobile phone and you're done, right? And then you have the rest of the industry, the core gamers, which I'll call them, where they've been told right now, hey, you have to be charged $80 a video game. And journalists are telling us that we should be fine paying $80 for video games, which is stupid. Games aren't worth $80. And games across the board, even games that might not even do that well, are taking 6 years to develop. The gaming industry, and I've said this before, I think there's going to be a crash happen at some point. I think AA and indie are going to be what people play for like 2 years straight until something happens. Because if you look at movies, I'm sorry I'm rambling, but I have a point to make.
No, please. This is a conversational podcast. I don't care if you take 15 minutes, brother. This is what needs to be said because you're making sense. God forbid someone on the internet makes sense.
It's like, if you look at the movie industry, let's look at like things like Jurassic Park back in the 90s, right? These big budget blockbusters that came out in the early 90s sometimes would take 2 to 4 years to make, right? And the development cost of those movies, the production costs, will be around what they are now, right? And what's happened over time? The cost of movies has kind of gone up. However, you can make a big blockbuster movie in about 18 months.
Yes.
CGI is better, technology's evolved. If you look at gaming, technology's evolved. It takes longer to make games. It takes more people to make these games.
Yep.
And if we are looking at a point where if you play a game now that's came out this year, we are not going to see a sequel to that game if it did well for a generation and a half. To me, that is absolutely crazy. It's absolutely crazy, right? Back in the 360, and yeah, I have a lot of nostalgia for that generation, but look in the 360, we had 3 BioShocks, 3 Batman Arkham games, 3 Mass Effects, 3 Dead Space, right? We had multiple Battlefield games that were peak. We had Call of Duty at its peak didn't have microtransactions or battle passes, right? We had unique IPs all the time. We had AAA games that would come out, do well, and not even get a sequel, right? We had 2 Elder Scrolls that generation. We had 4 Gears of War games that generation. Hell, there was 3 God of War games. There was 3 Uncharted games, right? We had consistent sequels because developers knew what they were doing. They weren't concentrating on getting photorealistic graphics out then because they were concentrating on unique art styles. And we had a good time that generation. And look at it now, right? like Indiana Jones, I think that was a 10 out of 10 game. We won't see a sequel to that for maybe, 2031? That's kind of depressing.
I mean, being that they have the assets and they just have to, create a new story or another chapter in his life, maybe it's a little bit less because you got to remember they're building when Indiana Jones comes out, they're building it from scratch, right?
Yeah.
Now they have, obviously there's the new DLC coming out at the end of the year with the Giants, which I can't wait for. Maybe it's 4 years. I don't think it's going to be anything quicker than that. But you're onto something. What's interesting, and I do want to just kind of bring this in as per context. Now, before the Christopher Drink story, Jamie, we were another big story of anti-Xbox rhetoric happened, and it came the way of a former developer for Arcane Studios. His name is Rafael Cantino, right? And this is what he said. Now, this blew up on the internet. And of course, Chris, being I forgot what they call them, the people that show up at messy accident scenes to take pictures. Night crawlers or something like that. That's ultimately what he is. Again, folks, if I got the naming wrong, please correct me in the chat. I think they're called night crawlers or something like that, where they show up, there's a horrific accident, and they take pictures, and they sell the pictures. Well, that's what ultimately Christopher Dring did with this story, because this story broke first. And Rafael Calentino, which, by the way, was a big part of Arcane, interestingly enough, though, he left the studio in 2017 for family reasons. So no smoke there. But you left the studio in 2017. Why are you now commenting on the industry? Because I don't even know if he's with a studio right now. I know he was with Arcane. He's no longer with them and hasn't been for years. Well, this is what he had to say, Jamie. I think Game Pass is unsustainable. It's an unsustainable model that has been increasingly damaging to the industry for decades, subsidized by Microsoft's quote, infinite money. But at some point, reality has to hit. I don't think Game Pass can coexist with other models. They're either kill everyone else or give up. Now, again, he's a human. He's entitled to his human opinion, but I have to push back on it. Because the one thing that continuously gets left out of the big conversation, and it's really common knowledge. There was a report from one of the big statistics for gaming sites, where they had deemed that younger people, not old people like us, younger people are spending 30+% less on video games. Now, I'm not an analyst, ladies and gentlemen. I'm in the business, sure, but I'm not an analyst. And you ask yourself, well, what's this unanswerable question? Well, that unanswerable question is real common knowledge. It's called free-to-play model. The free-to-play model has changed everything about spending in gaming, right? The free-to-play model can have someone on any device, whether that be their PC, their tablet, their TV, their phone, or their favorite game console, download the game and play that game with the subset of characters or character models for an infinity amount of time and never have to spend a dime. Now, do people spend on the microtransactions? Sure. But there are kids that don't care. They play Fortnite, they play the same character, and they go. You can blame Fortnite, you can blame Apex Legends, you can blame PUBG or Warzone, and now, Minecraft is another black hole game, right? You can also blame Marvel Rivals that just seems to keep taking up and sucking up the zeitgeist of the community. What shocks me is that somehow Game Pass giving players who may or may not have infinite money like Microsoft the ability to be a part of the gaming conversation at a budgeted price, but yet no one comes for Nintendo who just knocked the door off its effing hinges and said $80 games. And of course, Microsoft follows suit because, well, why not? And I think Microsoft's, point of view is, well, if we say we're going to charge $80, we're going to get people to subscribe to our service. I understand. Do I agree with $80 games? Abso-freaking-lutely not. So the fact that we have, groups of people, groups of websites continuing this hell-bent witch hunt that Xbox Game Pass is somehow to blame for every bad thing in gaming is beyond fathom. I don't even know what else to say. And I'm Bryce. Just so you got here, brother. We'll get to you in a second. But Jamie and Moran, I didn't mean to take over your conversation, but I had to add that because again, Christopher Dring's whole write-up, I think, has a lot to do with this original Arcane developer who has not been with the studio for 8 years and is now coming and talking out of turn. That's just my thought on it, but please continue.
Yeah, no, it's all right. As I was saying a minute ago, look at all the sequels we got during the 7th generation. Do you know what that generation, by the way, we had 8 Rockstar games. 8. Yeah, we had 2 Grand Theft Autos that generation, one of which had 2 expansions. What a good generation. But these people, they don't want to blame the obvious problems. So I mentioned the game budgets and I mentioned the game dev time. But like you said, it's the free-to-play games. That is a huge thing people don't realize. And I think the term is, was it black hole games or something like
that?
Yes,
that is the term, because again, you go in and like a black hole, you just stay there forever. I mean, it's
So when these games came about, you have people now, you'll hear them say, "Hey, I grew up on Fortnite." Well, one, that makes me sick in my mouth a little bit, but play some proper games, man. But like people grew up playing these like free to play Fortnite and all this stuff, right? You can play 1,000 hours of Fortnite and not need to pay a single penny, right? Same with Warzone and all this stuff, right? These people buying a console, buying a game to them is an alien concept, right? The 200 core player base, it's not growing, right? Like people from Microsoft, EA, I think Sony's mentioned this, right? The core group of gamers, they're not really getting any bigger, right? There's millions of more people almost every year coming into the gaming scene playing these free-to-play games. Look at EA, right? EA is the most unrealistic company on earth. Do you know they came out and said they want the new Battlefield game to have 100 million players? One, that's not going to happen. I love Battlefield, and that's not going to happen. But
yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. But it's good to have goals.
Yeah, but in their lofty their lofty imagination, they think that hey, we can have this Battlefield Warzone thing. Battlefield Battle Royale. That's a mouthful. And have people play this for years and years and years, give it endless content, and people will support it with microtransactions until the day they die. Right? That's what all these companies want. Remember how the multiplayer scene was like before Fortnite came out and we had battle passes? We were paying for map packs and multiplayer games every 3 months, right? Nobody really batted an eye, and everything changed because of these games. The free-to-play stuff messed up gaming, not Game Pass. And if I hear one more developer, or mainly journalist, tell me that I should be spending £80, that's $96, right, on a video game, I can tell them where to go. Because gaming is too expensive for us at the minute as consumers. They're spending way too much on developing these games. They're not doing anything to try and curb the whole like free-to-play market. They don't want to acknowledge that that's a problem. Because look, I'll say this right now. 20 years from now, when all of us are a lot older, and you have less and less people playing these AAA games. These AAA games that we all love, they're gonna be making a tiny amount of money compared to what they need. Tiny amount, because the millions of players coming into the industry at the minute, they want their free-to-play games with their skins that they're gonna play till the day they die. Right? That's what's gonna happen. So that's why I think Game Pass is actually really good for that as well, because Game Pass, I've seen introduce a lot of people that play free-to-play games into different genres. But hey, that's just my take.
Interestingly enough, the last quarter for Microsoft, who we know will cut ties if things aren't making money, they were up year over year 8% in both content and services. Services meaning Xbox Game Pass. And by the way, they saw a 45% year over year increase for Xbox Game Pass on PC. So what are these people talking about? I don't know. Umbra, take it away, my brother.
I mean, that the argument was funny because it was funny he said that. And well, listen, Dring has long been a thorn, I think, in the Xbox gamers side. It's been he's been one of the people why I believe people have started to feel a way about journalists and kind of like giving them the side eye. It's pretty obvious the man is very much a prefers, I would say, very much prefers PlayStation. I don't think it's a mystery, and I'm not even trying to say it like it's a negative, but I think that because of it, and he may not be aware of it, that bias tends to play off. And we always talk about the Xbox tax. This is kind of that in action, right? And it's not to say that he's like, man, let me get them. And it's not for us to try to protect a multi-trillion-dollar company of Microsoft, but it's a matter of what we deem as unfair, right? And we deem as shady. And he comes out and says this and writes this, and because he is who he is, he has a certain amount of respect given to him. His take is going to be taken very seriously by many. Excuse me. I have to stop drinking pop before we start. I just burp up a storm. Anyway, that's the caffeine fix I needed though. But yeah, people will take him serious, and that's when you see these articles and such pop up. I made a tweet about it saying, and I saw yours as well, Boom. Very great tweet.
Thank you.
The damage is kind of done.
Yeah,
like, you've done this. You said this. They've run these articles. people who may not even pay attention anymore have seen this and said, "Oh, look, Microsoft bad," and they'll keep going on with that viewpoint without knowing anything, right? Because that's how it works for a lot of people. They don't really pay attention to that. They catch a quick, catchy, headline, and that's what it is for them. That they don't need, article be damned. So that's happened, and now that he's retracted, he had to retract almost immediately. It was a few hours later.
A few hours afterwards, he put this ginormous retraction about how it's now profitable.
Right. And he's like, "Oh, oops, my bad. It is sustainable." Like, wait a minute. Now, kudos to him for coming out to, to correct it. I'm not going to fault him for that, but I think jumping out of the window saying that, immediately without any proof of anything, I feel like it betrays him being a journalist. I think you want to have more information before you start to state things, right? So that's problematic in itself, and it does lead to, I think, a lot of distrust or mistrust in the community for journalists, people like him, and it bleeds off into other journalists who actually are fair and do their due diligence and things like that, right? And will be treated much in the same as he will be because of things he said and how he acted on this in past situations. So that's part of the problem, I would say. So beyond that, Paris says Game Pass is not sustainable. Microsoft is ruining the gaming industry. They got to Paris, y'all. They got to him. They got but yeah, so I think that's that for one. The second was, I believe you said the Rafael, what was his name? Colantonio?
Yes, I have it here. Let me just pull it back up over here. Calentino is
Calentino.
Yeah.
And he was formerly with Arcane, right?
Yeah, he left the studio in 2017.
Okay, so for him, I mean, listen, I don't know. He knows a bit more, obviously, the inside than we do, but I don't think he would know the inner workings of what's profitable for Game Pass for Microsoft. I mean, and the argument that, oh, this is bad for devs, I don't see that, because, I mean, maybe it's bad for some devs. Maybe that could be argued, right? But we've seen devs come out and praise Game Pass continuously. And it's not like they're just being robbed or something, like Microsoft is stealing their intellectual property and putting it on there. They're being paid for that. And there are different tiers of deals made, right? And you don't have to, it's not like once you put the game on Game Pass, nobody can buy it. So I don't understand the argument. It's also not like in most of the cases that when the game is put on Game Pass, it's not elsewhere. It's not like it's not on Steam and PlayStation and sometimes Nintendo. So what is the argument there when you're getting a bag from Microsoft? You're still selling it on Microsoft's their ecosystem and on these other ecosystems. I don't understand how Game Pass is the bad guy. I don't really get that argument. It doesn't make sense to me. And you all were alluding to live service. I've said it before as well.
Yes,
many of us did. I don't want to make it like we just
we're not the first to say it, but it's
right.
You know what? Can I just add some additional context to your
Sure.
point? So this is very interesting. I didn't know this, and it just dawned on me when we were everyone was talking. I said, you know what? And mind you, this is just Steam, right? This is not PlayStation, Nintendo, and Xbox, but a lot of games that release on Steam also release on these platforms. So I asked the AI a question, and I asked, on average, how many video games are released monthly, right? Because I don't know what that number was. And according to the AI overview of Google, an average, and this is approximate, folks, 200 to 400 new video games are released on Steam monthly, which roughly translates to 10 games per day. Now, again, this is AI answering the question, but when you talk about Game Pass and how it's a detriment to the industry as a whole, how many of those released games are actually on Game Pass? I would say 1%. Maybe that 1%. Yes, a lot of games are on Xbox Game Pass, but they're also available to purchase if you want on Game Pass or your favorite other console. So again,
Yeah.
just adding context to what you were saying, Umbra, it's hard to understand how the rhetoric of Xbox Game Pass bad because it's changed how Xbox gamers buy games. Do you know how many games I bought in the last 3 days? Now, they're not $50 and $60 games, but I bought 11 and I pre-ordered
bought about
7.
the same. Yeah, I bought about 12 or so games myself the past week. And listen, the whole thought of you have people having to be shamed into and like, oh, you have to buy this. I don't have to do a thing.
Yeah.
If Game Pass goes under tomorrow, that is not on me. Microsoft is a $3.7 trillion company. I do not feel bad about their like the whole act that we got to care about the sales for them. I don't have to care about their sales.
No, you do not.
How many times do I have to tell people I'm arguing always from the point of us as consumers, never for them as business. I don't care about their business. You know what I mean? It's only so far as them continuing on so I can get Game Pass. That's about it. and their IP, because I do love their IP. But other than that, it's not like I'm like, man, sure wish Microsoft got all their money. I don't care about them getting money. You know what I mean? That's one. But, the thing is they are getting money. And so the act of arguing like Game Pass is stifling that fully, at least, is silly. And you can argue maybe it's stopping some of the sales of first party. You can argue that, right? Sure. But that's why they also started to, subsidize that by putting it on other platforms. So that's helped them. Now they got the $80 thing going, and it's not even so much as to charge, $80 for the game so much as to push people to Game Pass.
Yes, right? Hurting people to Game Pass. Where why spend $80 on one game when you can spend $240 for the year? And of course, you've heard people say, well, maybe they won't play all those games, and that's true. But if you buy 3 games at $80, Umbra, there's your $240 to what is going to equate to 12 first-party games by end of year on Xbox alone.
It's been a phenomenal year for them. Let's just be clear. But even beyond that, like going even beyond that, we the focus is Game Pass is bad, right?
Yes,
and somehow it's hurting the game industry. Well, you all alluded to the live service situation, and I don't care for live service games much, and I've said this before already too. And like I said, we're not unique in this, but we're absolutely correct in this. And that if you're looking at anything to point a finger at, as far as, oh, this is actually taking away from other games, it would definitely be the black hole games. They did a Circana review of this, right? A data.
Yes,
review.
They did. Circana, correct.
In January of this year alone, over 40% of the playtime on PlayStation and Xbox for gamers was spent on just 10 live service games. They didn't even touch other games. Just 10 live service across both. 70% of active players on these consoles, which is the casuals, right? Because most of them not coming to play games like we are. They're sticking right to those types of games. 70% of those have touched or played at least 10 of those live service games. So like the idea of robbing of Game Pass, robbing people of playing these other games or buying these other games, it's not really the problem. If anything, Microsoft is enriching them, because not only do they get promoted so people can buy it, because there are plenty of us who play the game and say, let me buy this. There are plenty of us who, it's plenty of us who will get it later, right? For whatever, because you get a discount through Game Pass too for the game. There's plenty of money to be had by putting it on Game Pass, which is why you see the retention of these games on there and them returning to Game Pass. Again, it's not like they're not being paid. It's the whole idea or notion that they're being robbed somehow. I don't understand.
In other words, hashtag save the devs.
Yeah, and now, for instance, somebody will argue, well, you would never see a Grand Theft Auto. Well, sure, because it's Grand Theft Auto. Let's be clear. If Microsoft wanted Grand Theft Auto on Game Pass, they can absolutely get Grand Theft Auto on Game Pass. They would just have to pay a pretty penny for it, and Rockstar would acquiesce. Now, that would be, you know, in the billion range, but they could absolutely do that, right? Somebody argued that the other day. We're mentioning Baldur's Gate 3. Well, they didn't put it on there because, you know, they saw whatever. Yeah, and it worked out for them. But let's be clear. If they wanted Baldur's Gate 3 on there, day and dates, they could have given them enough of a bag. The whole notion and the idea that they can't pay them for that to get them on there, they absolutely can. They got the money. So that's one. Two, there was a lot of, I saw another thing too, where there was a lot of, because of the sustainability argument, was that, what's centered around it is how the financials work for them, the game dev costs, which they erroneously chalked up into Game Pass, right? So I saw a lot of that too, and I think that's where it keeps coming from. And I don't understand the whole notion again. I know that this is a long past time of what, you know, fanboys do, because I don't really consider that the game are part of portion of things. When people like, let me finance and let me or at least hawk the financials of the game sales and the console sales. It's such an old traditional argument in gaming that it's so I've never liked it. I always kind of like drift off when it comes into that. It's like that I don't care about that, and it's something that has always been used for console warring. Let's just be real, and that's the only reason why people still care about it like that. They don't, you're not getting anything out of it to do all of that, right? Other than to be like, well, see, PlayStation is selling better or Xbox is doing this better, right? Typically, it's going to be PlayStation because that's the hooligans were continuously going on about. And because they are the ones who, if let's just be real, they were the ones who were always hyper fixated on that and pointing out game console sales and such like that, or game sales. It's always been them. As long as I've been playing games, it's always been them. So the whole idea of that has always been anti-gamer for me, because there's no reason for us to be involved in that conversation aside from just general wisdom and knowledge of the situation. Other than that, like arguing and posting it up all day, it's tiresome and it's tired. It's like, get out of that, man. Like, go play a game. We got so many right now to play. But again, all of that aside, I don't concern myself over the notion of Game Pass doing well for devs. I've seen enough of them say it does. Maybe for some, could it be argued it didn't benefit them enough? Maybe. I don't know, but I've seen enough say it does. I have seen yet to see anything that shows that they have not been sustainable. They said they were. They said it in a court, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
I'll take their word for it. I don't care enough to be like, nope.
Well, they have to report every quarter to investors, and they can't illegally lie about being profitable or not.
That too. And I just don't see the need to, like, let me go over this with a fine tooth comb and then fine. I don't care. If it's not profitable for them, I see no reason why Microsoft, who people are like, Paris said it in the chat, really, and it's a great point. And I've seen other people say it. If it was so unsustainable, why would Satya, who's been chopping off everything,
I literally said that.
This going? Yeah, it doesn't add up, right? So I think that's all the answer you kind of need there.